The beginning of the end. The vast expanse of space was alive with the fury of battle. The Cretan fleet, once a proud symbol of their civilization's strength, was being torn apart. The sky, a deep, unyielding black, shimmered with flashes of bright explosions as their ships exploded in a violent cascade of fire. One by one, their once impressive warships succumbed to the relentless barrage of plasma fire from the invading Zaran forces. The Cretans had long known peace and prosperity in the outer reaches of the galaxy, but now their world was in peril. Captain Alaric gripped the controls of his command chair as alarms blared across the bridge of the Cretan flagship, the Vanguard. His face was drawn tight with stress, his sharp features furrowed in concentration. The reports were coming in fast and brutal. Shields were failing, weapons were offline, and the hull was beginning to buckle under the strain of the constant barrage. Even the most advanced Cretan technology, honed over centuries of spacefaring, was unable to match the overwhelming force of the Zaran Empire's assault. "Status report," Captain Alaric barked, his voice laced with urgency. His chief officer, Lieutenant Nissa, quickly consulted her terminal. "Sir, we're losing ships at an alarming rate. The Zarans have focused their fire on our flanks, and we can't keep up with their firepower. The Vanguard's engines are failing, and our defensive systems are on the verge of collapse." A cold chill ran down Alaric's spine. This was not supposed to happen. The Cretans had always been the dominant force in their sector of the galaxy, with technology and defense systems far beyond most of their neighbors. Yet here they were, losing the fight against an enemy that seemed to appear from nowhere, their ships moving with a terrifying precision, as if they knew exactly how to exploit the Cretans' weaknesses. The Vanguard shook violently as another plasma bolt tore through its starboard side, sending a shockwave through the entire ship. Sparks flew from the damaged consoles, and the lights flickered in and out. The Cretans were outclassed. They were outgunned. And worst of all, they were running out of time. Alaric's mind raced. There had to be something they could do. The Cretan fleets were not without strength, but the Zarans had somehow turned the tide of this battle with terrifying ease. The captain's hands tightened into fists, knuckles white, as he stared at the damage reports pouring in. This was it. The beginning of the end. If they couldn't hold their ground here, the Zarans would invade their homeworld, and everything they had fought for would be lost. Suddenly, the comm officer, Officer Corin, called out in alarm, "Captain, a new contact is coming out of warp. It's huge, sir. Far larger than any ship we'd seen before. It's human." Alaric froze. His mind scrambled to comprehend what he was hearing. Humans. They were a relatively young species, barely beginning to make a name for themselves on the galactic stage. How could a human ship be here? And why would it be so enormous? "Put it on screen," Alaric ordered, his voice now filled with disbelief. The view screen flickered, and in a heartbeat, a colossal vessel appeared. It was unlike anything the Cretans had ever seen. It was sleek, dark, and bristling with weapons, more guns than any warship should be allowed to have. The strange markings on the side of the ship sent a jolt of recognition through Alaric's mind. This was the United Earth ship Defiant. Before anyone could say anything, a deep, commanding voice crackled over the comm system. "This is Captain Jason Reeves of the United Earth ship Defiant. We've picked up your distress call. Hold on, Cretans. Help is on the way." The crew stared at the screen in stunned silence. This was no ordinary vessel, and the human captain was no ordinary officer. He was calm, assured, and utterly unshaken by the chaos unfolding before him. The Defiant fired a salvo of missiles, its weapons lighting up the dark expanse of space as they tore into the Zaran ships with precision. Alaric watched in awe as the Zaran ships, so sure of their victory, now found themselves under attack from an unexpected quarter. The Defiant's weapons blasted through the Zaran fleet like a hot knife through butter. In a matter of moments, the first Zaran frigate exploded in a brilliant flash of light, its shields collapsing under the onslaught of human weaponry. The Defiant was a juggernaut, moving through the battle with the ease of a predator hunting its prey. The Zarans, once the apex predators of the galaxy, now found themselves at a disadvantage, unable to cope with the sheer power of this new force. Alaric felt a spark of hope flicker in his chest. Could it be? Could the humans be the key to turning the tide of this battle? He knew the Cretans had to fight with everything they had, but if this human ship could hold off the Zarans, there was a chance, just a slim chance, that they could pull through. Lieutenant Nissa, open a channel to the Defiant. We need to coordinate our defense, Alaric ordered. A moment later, the screen flickered again, and the image of Captain Jason Reeves appeared. His dark eyes gleamed with determination, his face set in a grim expression as he assessed the battlefield. "I'm here to help," Captain Reeves said simply. "We'll take the fight to them together. Let's show them what humanity is made of." Alaric, still unsure of what to make of this strange, new ally, nodded. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he allowed himself to believe in victory again. The Defiant moved with brutal efficiency, its weapons cutting through the Zaran forces like they were nothing more than paper. Captain Reeves' orders were sharp, precise, and unwavering. Every move was calculated to ensure maximum damage, every shot designed to cripple the enemy. It was clear now that the humans were no strangers to combat. They had come to the galaxy's stage not with the arrogance of a powerful empire, but with the quiet confidence of a species who had learned how to survive against all odds. Alaric couldn't help but wonder about these humans. They had come from a distant planet, barely more than a speck on the galactic map, and yet here they were, fighting alongside the Cretans against the might of the Zaran Empire. How had they come so far? How had they become so powerful? These were questions that would have to wait. For now, there was a battle to win. The Defiant's weapons fired once more, and a Zaran destroyer disintegrated in a fiery explosion. The sound of the blast was almost deafening, even through the comm system. Alaric watched as the human ship moved effortlessly between the enemy lines, picking off Zaran ships one by one. They were unstoppable. As the last of the Zaran ships fell under the might of the Defiant, Captain Alaric took a deep breath, his mind racing. The tide had shifted. With the help of the humans, the Cretan fleet was finally turning the corner. Victory was within reach. But Alaric knew this was only the beginning. The Zaran Empire was vast, and this was only one battle in a much larger war. Still, the arrival of the humans had brought hope to the Cretans. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could fight back. Captain Reeves' voice crackled over the comm system again. "This battle isn't over, Cretan Captain. We've taken down their flagship, but the Zaran fleet is far from finished. They'll be back, and next time, they'll come harder." Alaric nodded grimly. "Understood, human. Let's make sure they regret coming back." With renewed determination, Alaric turned his attention to the battle ahead. It wasn't over yet, but now they had a fighting chance, and they wouldn't waste it. A new alliance. The battle had shifted in their favor, but the fight was far from over. In the vastness of space, the war between the Cretans and the Zaran Empire raged on, and with each passing second, the stakes grew higher. The Cretan fleet had sustained heavy losses, and though the appearance of the Defiant had given them a much-needed boost, they were still outmatched. The Zarans, relentless and cruel, were not easily deterred. On the bridge of the Vanguard, Captain Alaric could still feel the tension in the air. His officers were busy at their stations, working to keep the ship functional after the devastating blows they had taken. Alaric stood at the front of the room, staring at the view screen, his thoughts consumed by the sheer scale of the battle. The sight of the Zaran warships, so massive and menacing, looming like predators on the hunt, sent a chill down his spine. "Captain, we've managed to stabilize the engines," Lieutenant Nissa called out, her voice calm yet tinged with the exhaustion that came from hours of non-stop combat. "But our weapons are still offline. We won't be able to contribute much to the offensive unless we can restore power to our systems." Alaric nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He had fought battles before, many battles, but never one like this. Never one where the very existence of his people was at risk. The Czarans weren't just invading, they were annihilating. Their ships were larger, their weapons more advanced, and their tactics brutal. But somehow, they had made a critical mistake by underestimating humanity. Captain Reeves' voice crackled over the comm, interrupting his thoughts. "Captain Alaric, the Czarans are regrouping. They've taken heavy losses, but they're not finished yet. I recommend we fall back to the asteroid field at coordinates 15 to 23. It'll give us some cover while we plan our next move." Alaric turned toward the comm officer, his eyes narrowing. He knew Reeves was right. The Czaran fleet was a wounded animal, but a wounded animal could still be deadly. The last thing they needed was to let their guard down. "Understood," Alaric replied, his voice firm. "Lieutenant Nissa, plot a course to the asteroid field. Get us moving as fast as we can." The Vanguard's engines roared to life once more, though the ship groaned under the strain. As they moved into position, Alaric glanced at the view screen again, watching as the last remnants of the Czaran fleet circled like vultures. They had taken damage, but they weren't retreating. They were regrouping, ready to strike again. Meanwhile, on the bridge of the Defiant, Captain Jason Reeves was coordinating the next phase of the battle. His ship had proven its worth, decimating the Czaran fleet with surgical precision, but the situation was still dire. The Defiant was a technological marvel, yes, but it couldn't fight a war alone. If the Czarans had one thing going for them, it was their numbers. The human ship was surrounded by wreckage from the enemy fleet, but there were still too many Czaran ships on the horizon. "Captain, we've got a few more Czaran ships on the radar. They're coming in fast," his tactical officer, Lieutenant Sarah Thompson, said as she adjusted the readings on her console. "But the Vanguard is pulling back to the asteroid field. Should we pursue?" Reeves thought for a moment, his eyes scanning the data. He could sense that the Cretans were desperate. They had fought valiantly, but it was clear they were running low on resources. He couldn't let them fall back and fade into obscurity. The human mission was to ensure that the Czaran Empire didn't get a foothold in this part of the galaxy. But more importantly, the Cretan people were now his allies. If they fell, humanity would be next. "No, we'll hold our position," Reeves finally decided. "We've taken enough risks for today. We'll keep the Czarans at bay and wait for the Cretan fleet to regroup. If they need our help, we'll be there. But for now, our priority is securing the defensive perimeter." His crew nodded, and the ship's systems hummed as it continued to scan for enemy threats. As much as he wanted to chase down the remaining Czaran ships, he knew the human fleet was stretched thin. They had to be careful. Their strength lay in their adaptability and their cunning, not in brute force. Back on the Vanguard, Alaric stood at the helm, watching as the asteroid field loomed ahead. It was a natural formation, a scattered mess of debris left behind from a long-forgotten collision, and it provided the perfect cover for their next move. But Alaric knew that taking refuge in the asteroid field was only a temporary solution. The Czarans would soon follow, and if they couldn't repair their ships or find a way to match the enemy's firepower, the Cretans would be doomed. "We need to buy time," Alaric muttered to himself. "Enough time to get our weapons back online and reinforce our fleet." "Captain," Nissa called out, interrupting his thoughts. "There's something you need to see. The human ship, they're preparing to move. They're heading toward the Czaran forces again." Alaric's brow furrowed. "What are they thinking? Why would they risk it?" "I don't know, sir," Nissa replied, "but it looks like they're taking a calculated risk. Their ship is fast. We've seen it move in and out of enemy lines with precision. They may be trying to pick off the weaker vessels in the Czaran fleet before they regroup." A sense of awe and trepidation washed over Alaric. The humans, it seemed, had no fear. They fought with the audacity of a species that had nothing to lose. And yet, that very fearlessness was what made them so dangerous to the Czarans. They had struck fear into the heart of the enemy, something that hadn't happened in centuries. The Czarans were used to dominating weaker species, But humans were different. Alaric leaned forward, his voice tight with resolve. "We'll need to be ready when the time comes. Contact Captain Reeves. Let him know we'll be ready to join the fight once we've patched up our defenses." Lieutenant Nissa quickly sent the message, and soon the comm channel opened with Reeves' voice, calm as ever. "Captain Alaric, we're ready to strike. Once you've gotten your weapons back online, let us know. We'll push the Zarans back together. But we'll need you to hold the line while we engage their remaining ships." Alaric's heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and determination. The humans had proven their worth in this battle, but this was just the beginning. Together, they had the strength to turn the tide. Alone, the Cretans would have been doomed. With the humans, however, they could hold their ground. "We'll be ready," Alaric replied, his voice steady with newfound confidence. "Let's finish this." As the Vanguard continued to maneuver through the asteroid field, preparing for their next confrontation, Alaric couldn't help but reflect on the strange turn of events. The humans had entered this battle as outsiders, unproven on the galactic stage. But now they were an indispensable part of the Cretan fight for survival. The alliance between them was one born out of necessity, but Alaric could feel the stirring of something deeper, something more meaningful. Humanity had not only come to the aid of the Cretans, they had become their partners in the fight against the Zaran Empire. And that partnership would be tested like never before. The war was far from over, but with the humans on their side, the Cretans could finally see a glimmer of hope at the end of a long and bloody tunnel. And that hope would drive them forward into the next phase of this epic battle for survival. The humans' resolve. The days following the first major clash with the Zaran forces were filled with tension. Both fleets had taken heavy losses, but the Cretan flagship Vanguard had managed to find some temporary refuge in the asteroid field. The human vessel, Defiant, had taken up position just outside the field's perimeter, scanning for any signs of the Zaran fleet's movements. Captain Alaric paced the bridge of the Vanguard, his mind racing with the implications of what had happened. He had seen battles before, but never one where the very existence of his people hung in the balance. The alliance with the humans was still new, and Alaric couldn't help but wonder, who were these people who had come from a small, distant planet, unknown to the greater galactic powers? They had arrived without warning, and in the span of a few hours had changed the course of the battle. Their weapons were unlike anything the Cretans had ever seen, capable of cutting through the Zaran fleet with ruthless efficiency. But more than their weapons, it was their approach to warfare that had intrigued him. They were methodical, precise, and most shockingly, fearless. On the Defiant, Captain Jason Reeves stood before his crew, his arms crossed over his chest, eyes focused on the holographic map of the battlefield. His face was calm, but his mind was running at full speed. The Zaran Empire had made a critical mistake by attacking the Cretans, and now, with the help of the humans, they were about to learn just how costly that mistake had been. But the war was far from over. The Zaran fleet had retreated into deep space, regrouping and likely planning their next move. And the humans, despite their initial success, were far from certain about what lay ahead. "Lieutenant Thompson, status report," Captain Reeves called out, his voice steady. "Sir, the Zarans are holding at the edge of the system. They've split their forces. One faction is advancing slowly, while the other appears to be moving into hiding. It's almost like they're licking their wounds, but I'm betting they're preparing for something big." Reeves nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's what I thought. We need to be ready. Let's stay close to the Vanguard. The Cretans are still licking their wounds too, and we need to support them until they're ready to rejoin the fight." "Yes, sir," Thompson responded, her fingers flying over the console as she relayed the orders to the crew. Meanwhile, Alaric was facing his own challenges. The Vanguard had sustained severe damage during the initial assault. While they had managed to restore some power to the engines, their weapon systems were still offline. They had some time, but the Zarans were not the type to give their enemies a chance to recover. They were calculating and relentless, and they would be back soon, more dangerous than ever. Nissa, the ship's chief officer, approached Alaric with a datapad in hand. "Captain, we've patched up most of the systems, but there's still a problem with our primary shields. Without them, we're going to be sitting ducks when the Zarans return. I don't know how long we can last with the current situation." Alaric frowned, his brow furrowing. "We don't have much time. We need to find a way to push through it." "We might have a solution," Nissa said, her eyes lighting up. "We've been analyzing the human ship's technology. From what we've seen, their shielding systems are far more advanced than anything we've ever encountered. If we can get a hold of the specs, maybe we can adapt their technology to fit our ship." Alaric's mind raced as he processed the information. It was a risky move, but it might be their only hope. Contact Captain Reeves. Ask them to share the schematics for their shield technology. If we can get our hands on that, we'll have a fighting chance. A few minutes later, the comms officer spoke up. "Captain, we've got Captain Reeves on the line. He's ready to discuss the shield tech." "Put him through," Alaric ordered. The holographic image of Captain Reeves appeared on the bridge. His face was calm, but there was a hint of concern in his eyes. "Captain Alaric, what's the situation on your end? The Zarans are regrouping, and we need to make sure we're not caught off guard." "We're still repairing the ship, Captain. We've got engines back online, but our shield systems are severely compromised. We need your help. If you're willing to share the specs for your shield technology, we think we can adapt it to our ship." Reeves' expression softened, and for a moment, Alaric saw a glimpse of the humanity that drove the human captain. He nodded once. "You're not asking for much, Captain. We'll send over the schematics. It's a risky move, but we don't have time to hesitate. We'll help you." True to his word, a few minutes later, the schematics for the human ship's advanced shield systems were transmitted to the Vanguard. Alaric felt a sense of relief wash over him. The shields were not a perfect match for their technology, but with some ingenuity, the Cretan engineers might be able to make it work. They were good, very good, and Alaric had full confidence that they would get it done. "Get to work," Alaric said, his voice filled with determination. "We don't have much time. The Zarans will be back before we know it." As the Cretan engineers scrambled to implement the new shield technology, Alaric took a moment to step back and survey the battlefield. The Vanguard was only one ship in the fleet, but it was the symbol of the Cretan resistance. Their survival depended on their ability to hold out, not just against the Zarans, but against all odds. And they weren't alone anymore. Captain Reeves had been right. The humans were fearless. They had come into this fight with a level of resolve that Alaric hadn't seen in any other species. They didn't care that they were newcomers to the galactic stage. They didn't care that the Zarans were ruthless and powerful. All they cared about was winning, and they had the drive to make it happen. Alaric had once believed that the Cretans were the most formidable force in the galaxy, but now he wasn't so sure. The humans had proven that it wasn't just technology that made a species powerful. It was the will to survive. It was the drive to protect your own, no matter the odds. Back on the Defiant, Captain Reeves was preparing for the next stage of the battle. His mind was sharp, focused on the war ahead. The Zarans had made one mistake after another, and he was ready to capitalize on their blunders. But even as the Defiant moved into position, ready to strike the Zaran forces once again, Reeves couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Cretans had joined the fight, but the war would be long and brutal. And in the end, it would be the humans who would have to lead the charge. "Lieutenant Thompson, keep scanning for Zaran movements. We need to know where they're regrouping," Reeves said, his voice steady as ever. "I've got it, sir," Thompson replied. "It looks like they're consolidating their forces around the outer rim of the system. They're going to come at us hard, and they're not going to give up easily." Reeves nodded grimly. "We've fought hard to get this far. We're not letting them take it back. The Zarans have underestimated us, and now it's time to show them just how wrong they were." As the Defiant prepared to re-enter the fray, Captain Reeves thought back to the day the humans had arrived on the battlefield. The Cretans had been on the brink of collapse, their fleet decimated by the overwhelming might of the Czarans. But now, with the Defiant leading the charge and the Cretan forces rallying behind them, the humans and the Cretans were united in a common goal. They weren't just allies anymore. They were brothers in arms. And the Czarans would soon learn that the humans' resolve was as unyielding as the stars themselves. They would not break, and they would not lose. The turning point. The war between the Cretan fleet and the Czaran Empire had reached a boiling point. The once bleak battlefield now burned with the promise of a new dawn, fueled by an unlikely alliance. The Vanguard, with its damaged hull and battered systems, was now on the verge of a miraculous recovery, thanks to the human ship, the Defiant, and the audacious efforts of Captain Alaric and his crew. The tide had turned in their favor, but the danger was far from over. The Czarans were regrouping, and they would not relinquish their conquest easily. Captain Alaric stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, his gaze fixed on the view screen as the remains of the Czaran fleet gathered on the outer rim of the system. Their ships were massive, intimidating, and relentless. Their pride had been shattered by the humans, but their hunger for victory was unyielding. Alaric felt a deep sense of resolve within himself. They had come this far, and they were not about to let their enemies reclaim the upper hand. The Cretans would fight with everything they had, and with the humans at their side, they might just have a chance. "Captain," Lieutenant Nissa called from her station, her voice tight with focus. "We've completed the modifications. The human shield technology is integrated, and we've restored power to our weapon systems. The Vanguard is operational again." Alaric's lips twitched into a rare smile, though it was one born of grim determination rather than joy. "Good. Prepare for battle. We'll need every advantage we can get." As the Vanguard moved out of the asteroid field and into open space, the crew braced themselves for what was about to come. The Cretan fleet was still in disarray, but their numbers had increased, with the remnants of the fleet now regrouping around the Vanguard for one final stand. The Defiant had already taken its position, its weapons ready to strike. With the combined forces of the Cretans and the humans, the Czaran fleet would face an enemy they had not anticipated, one that would fight with a fury they had not yet encountered. The Defiant's engines hummed with power as it glided through space, its dark form a sharp contrast against the shimmering stars. Captain Reeves stood at the helm, his gaze focused and unwavering. He had seen the brutality of the Czaran forces firsthand, but he had also seen what humanity was capable of. They had proven themselves in battle, time and time again, and now they stood side by side with the Cretans, a race whose survival had once seemed impossible. But humanity was not a race that simply survived. It thrived, it fought, and it conquered. Together, the two species had the strength to do what no one had thought possible. They could defeat the Czarans. "We're in position," Lieutenant Thompson reported from her console, her fingers moving with practiced precision. "The Czarans are moving toward us. They're not holding back this time." Reeves exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. This would be the battle that defined the future of the galaxy. The Czarans had been ruthless, but they had underestimated humanity. And now, they would pay the price. "All hands, prepare for combat. We'd fought long enough to get here. Now, let's end this." The bridge was silent for a moment as the crew of the Defiant prepared themselves. The tension in the air was palpable, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. Humanity was a young species, but they had the heart and the courage to stand up to the giants of the galaxy. And today, they would prove it once again. On the Vanguard, Alaric stood at the front of the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back. The Cretan fleet, though battered and bruised, was ready for battle. Their weapons were fully restored, and their shields, enhanced by human technology, would provide them with the protection they needed to face the Czaran onslaught. The Cretans had never fought with such determination, and it was clear that their newfound alliance with humanity had reignited their will to fight. "Captain Alaric," Nissa said, her voice sharp as she relayed information from the sensors. "The Zarans are advancing. They're coming in fast, and they're not going to give us any room to breathe. Their flagship is leading the charge." Alaric's eyes narrowed. He had seen the Zaran flagship, the Fist of Conquest, up close. It was a monstrosity, huge, heavily armored, and armed to the teeth. But even it had its weaknesses, and with the humans by their side, the Krekens were no longer at a disadvantage. "Prepare to engage," Alaric said firmly. "Target their flagship first. If we can take down their leader, the rest of the fleet will scatter." On the Defiant, Captain Reeves was already giving orders, his voice calm but urgent. "Tactical, load up the neutron cannons. We're going after their flagship first. Let's make sure the Zarans know that we're not here to negotiate." The Defiant's weapons flared to life as it moved into the fray. The first volley of fire slammed into the Zaran ships, cutting through their shields like a knife through butter. The Vanguard joined in, its enhanced shields holding strong as its weapons fired in perfect synchronization with the Defiant's assault. The Zaran fleet was thrown into chaos as their ships were systematically dismantled, one by one. But the Zarans weren't going down without a fight. Their ships fired back with brutal force, and the Vanguard took the brunt of the assault. The bridge rocked as explosions reverberated through the ship, and alarms blared across the hull. "Shields holding at 60%, Captain," Nissa called out, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We've taken some hits, but we're still in the fight." Alaric nodded grimly. The Kretens had faced worse odds before, but this time, they had something the Zarans didn't: unity. The humans had given them the strength to stand firm, to face the impossible, and to fight for their survival. They weren't just fighting for their homeworlds anymore. They were fighting for a future where all species, no matter how small, could stand against the oppressive might of the Zaran Empire. On the Defiant, Captain Reeves clenched his fists as he watched the battlefield unfold. The Zaran flagship loomed ahead, its massive guns firing with deadly precision. But the Defiant was faster, more agile, and its weapons tore through the flagship's defenses like they were nothing. Another blast rocked the Zaran ship, and its shields flickered weakly. "We're almost there," Reeves muttered under his breath. "One more push, and we can end this." As the Defiant and Vanguard closed in on the Zaran flagship, the final confrontation began. The Zaran ships, now desperate to turn the tide, launched a full assault, their weapons firing at all angles. But the humans and the Kretens had fought together for too long to be intimidated by the Zarans' desperation. Their teamwork was flawless, their resolve unshakable. The Defiant fired another round of neutron cannons, and the massive Zaran flagship shuddered as its hull began to crack. Explosions erupted from its engines, and in a final, catastrophic display of destruction, the flagship was torn apart, its remains scattering across the battlefield like debris. The remaining Zaran forces, now leaderless and broken, began to retreat. The once mighty empire, which had swept through countless worlds with ease, had been defeated by a combined force of Kretens and humans, a force that refused to bow to tyranny. On the Vanguard, Captain Alaric allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The Zarans would return, and when they did, the Kretens and humans would be ready. Alaric turned to Nissa, his voice resolute. "We've won this battle, Lieutenant, but we have to stay vigilant. The Zarans won't stop. Not now. Not ever." Nissa nodded, her face set in determination. "We're ready, Captain. We'll fight until the very end." And together, the Kretens and humans sailed into the unknown, knowing that the true war had only just begun.